Thank you.
So thank you very much, Georg, for your kind words. And thank you also, Jens. So we are going to move to London, but just before, one word. The focus, the objective of this meeting is to not look backward, but look forward. So it's not what we have done, it's what we can do with what we have done, but at a larger scale. That's the objective of our meeting. Nathan, can we open the London studio? Ah. London, this is Paris.
Hi, can you hear us, Philippe?
Yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
That's a full room. Huh?
And we have Graham as well. Brilliant. Over to us. Thank you very much, Philippe. And thank you also to Jens and Georg for your opening comments. It's great to be able to talk to you in this sort of like semi-live, semi-online. Not all of us are in the same room because we have Graham here joining us by Zoom as well, but we're nearly there. A sort of semi-live event for you from the studio here in London City Hall, where we are joined by Sarah Butler from the London Borough of Greenwich and Hannah Griffiths from the consultancy Jacobs. And then we've got Graham Colclough on the Zoom call with us from sunny Scotland, I do believe, from the consultancy UrbanDNA, and you will know him as well from the EIP. And I am Nathan Pearce. I'm the head of the Smart London team here at City Hall in London, and I'm also the coordinator and programme director for the Sharing Cities programme. Thank you very much to Smarter Together for inviting us here to carry out this studio session for you today. We are going to be talking in this session about investment, accessing finance and scale up, words that I'm sure you will hear a lot of over the course of the next day and a half, as we really start to think about how do we push on the work from these 18 or more projects into scaled up opportunities across the cities that they've operated in and across the European market and the worldwide market as well. I'm going to tell you a brief bit about the Sharing Cities programme now, and then we're going to get into a conversation with our panellists. So Sharing Cities, very similar programme in terms of how it's set up to Smarter Together, but Sharing Cities is the cities of Greenwich in London, Milan in Italy, and Lisbon in Portugal. They are our lighthouse cities where the technologies have been mainly implemented. And then we have the fellow cities or replicator cities of Bordeaux in France, Warsaw in Poland, and Burgas in Bulgaria. So the one thing that would probably strike you about the Sharing Cities programme is that the cities that are in our programme are very big ones. We have a combined population of about 18 million, so we've got quite a large coverage. 3 of those cities are capital cities, and I like to joke that one of those cities, Milan, likes to think that it's a capital city. And we have quite a lot of strong financial sectors in each of our cities. And we're all very keen to make sure that the work that we do as part of this programme lasts and is scaled up in the areas that we operate in. Now, Sharing Cities has been implementing 10 types of smart technologies over the past 5 or 6 years. We've been extended by 1 year. And these technologies, again, very similar to Smarter Together. So retrofitting buildings to make them energy efficient, smart mobility, smart electric mobility measures, citizen engagement and citizen behaviour incentivization applications, data platforms, sustainable energy management systems, smart lampposts, and I think I've pretty much covered it all. Lots of sensors, all types of sensors that you could possibly imagine. And all of these technologies, from a strategic point of view, are low carbon, green tech, clean tech types of technology aimed at creating energy efficiencies or reducing the need for car journeys or for carbon fueled heating systems. And one of our key strategic aims as the Sharing Cities programme is all about how do we use these pilots to really accelerate the smart city marketplace. And how do we attract investment into our cities and into Europe by triggering things at scale? So it's no good just testing technologies in a small area, writing up a case study, and then patting ourselves on the back and saying, that's it, we're going to go home. This is all about saying, how do we take what worked, what genuinely reduced carbon, and how do we then scale that up, and how do we then encourage others to commission this technology? And to really sort of, pin our colours to the wall, and to give ourselves a strong target. We as a partnership have got a target of triggering 500 million of additional investment off the back of the 24 million that we received from the European Commission. And I'm delighted to say that as of this point, we are at around 260 million of that target. And we have quite a lot in the pipeline as well. So we are still relatively confident that we will hit that 500 million target or thereabouts. And what that does is it really demonstrates that there is a business case behind what we're doing. There is interest from the investment communities, and there is the possibility to scale up the technologies that we have tested in Sharing Cities across the 34 partners that make up the Sharing Cities programme. So that is a brief introduction to Sharing Cities and our strategic aims, which now segues into the conversation we're going to have about investment and business modelling. So my first question, which is going to go first of all to the two ladies that have joined me here in the room, and then to you, Graham, is first of all, tell us a bit more about yourself and the organisation that you come from. And can you give me a good example of additional investment or something that has been scaled up from the Sharing Cities programme that you're particularly interested or proud of? I'll go to you first then.
Yeah, sure. So, as they said, my name is Sarah Butler and I'm the programme manager for Sharing Cities in Greenwich. And that basically means over the last few years, I've led the delivery of the Sharing Cities London demonstrator in the Royal Borough of Greenwich. And as a background, my background is as an environmentalist. I started my career working in climate change at the United Nations. So the real chance for me into leading this programme and being part of Sharing Cities was to see how we could integrate, use new technology, bring about smart technologies for the purpose of tackling climate change and driving down emissions. And I think the Sharing Cities programme and Smarter Together and all of the SCCO ones have that at their core, and I've certainly demonstrated that over the last few years. So to point your question, Nathan, about examples of scale, obviously we're one demonstrator in one EU programme, and there's a lot of different levels of scale, I think, but for us, an example of local scale has been our EV lamppost charging points. So through the Sharing Cities programme, we started off delivering about 26 EV lamppost charging points, and we used a new approach to community engagement to do that. We used an online platform. We went out to our residents across the borough and asked them to literally put a pin in a map online as to where they would like an EV lamppost charging point, to try and sort of bring about that increase in infrastructure, EV infrastructure, to the home to enable people to start to shift to electric vehicles. So that approach worked really well. We got a lot of buy-in and we delivered those 26 points. Moving on from that, over the last couple of years, that approach has been so successful that we're looking at rolling that out across the whole borough, using that same online engagement and delivering a further 50 to 100 points just in the next year. So that's one example. I think I'd also touch on a different kind of example, which has been the work we've done around looking at smart technology and renewable technology for low carbon heat. So as part of the Sharing Cities project, we looked at how we could deliver a low carbon heating system for one of our social housing estates. We came up with a very innovative water source heat pump solution. And that took a lot of time, lots of research, funded and supported by this EU programme. And what we've done from that is we've taken the techno-economic modelling we applied in that, we've taken the stakeholder engagement, the market engagement, the procurement expertise, and we've made that our business as usual. We've changed the way we look at how we run our heating systems. We're now going on to deliver a further 5 systems in the next year, and that will deliver an additional 12,000 tonnes of carbon savings. So it may be just local, but it's one example of how we've taken what we've learned in the EU programme, we've taken that smart tech, and it's become our business as usual, and it's changing the way we do things at a local scale.
And of course, that puts us, or it certainly puts Greenwich at the forefront of both national programmes, which are looking at heating, heat pumps across the whole of housing stock, and Europe as well, which is looking at this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been able to take that learning and the journey we've gone through to help others and help others not have to go through the same process, to share that learning and really sort of fast track the scale of the technology in London and elsewhere.
And what you mentioned at first there was about outcome-driven and needs-driven approach to applying or scaling up the technology, and I'm sure we will come back to that point at some point soon. Hannah, over to you.
I'm Hannah Griffiths, and I'm a Senior Associate Director in the Smart Places and Digital Infrastructure team at Jacobs. And so for the last 8 or so years, I've worked with local authorities and developers across the UK and also in the Middle East, China and America to deploy technology into the built environment. And for the last 2 years, I've also advised a number of quite large-scale digital infrastructure investments and transactions. So I feel like I have a good view of both sides of the business model kind of equation. And I'd say that's what I focus on most. So I haven't been heavily involved in the Sharing Cities programme to this point, but I'd say an example of an innovative business model that I helped to bring forward was working with a local authority in Greater Manchester. It was a domestic retrofit scheme, but there was very little funding for it. So by mapping out the kind of benefits of conducting that scheme, we were able to secure funding from the NHS due to the additional warmth that scheme would bring to homes, reduction in fuel poverty, therefore reduction in winter illnesses, falls, etc. They could directly map that onto their the pressure on the NHS, and therefore we're able to fund it that way. So I'd say that was a key interest area of mine, is linking up new types of funding sources, which I'm sure we'll get into later.
Indeed, and that cuts across when you think about things from a business case point of view, social, environmental and economic, and I'm sure we will come back onto that point in the following questions. Graham, over to you as the person who is responsible for counting up the money that contributes towards our 500 million target. I hope that you've got a good overview of some of the impressive scale up that's come out of Sharing Cities already.
Indeed. So thanks, Nathan. And just by way of background, so I started in dirty oil many years ago, moved to global transformation, and then moved to transformation of cities, and found that so absolutely fascinating about 20 years ago. I really got stuck in with a vengeance, and have been involved, I think Gil mentioned it earlier, at the very outset of the Lighthouse community and also the outset of the Smart City Marketplace as it stands. Within Sharing Cities, I was the chap who came up with the idea of the 500 million. And so I feel a great deal of passion towards that goal. And I think it's really important because we are one of a large number of programs. We cannot deliver the future that Jens mentioned alone. We can only do it through collaboration and through joined up solutions. By way of answer to the question of specifics, I'd actually like to focus on the process as to particular examples. So Burgas, as one of our fellow cities close to the Sharing Cities group, is spectacular in terms of the poster child of actually raising funds to do things that the lead cities have acted on. And they've raised well over 100 million euros as part of that 5 million challenge. So from Sharing Cities, it's clear, demonstrable benefit, but it goes beyond that. So working with the UK Department for International Trade, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, engaging Central Eastern European cities. So that's a process that GLA have been involved in together with ourselves in terms of actually going beyond Sharing Cities, but still within Europe. And we've had 2 sessions to engage on some very practical measures of the humble lamppost, the like. where we've engaged more than 50 cities in total to those cities in Central Eastern Europe. And it goes beyond that. The funnel are well outside sharing cities community. An example of that would be Medellin in Colombia, where the World Bank and the commercial arm of the World Bank, IFC, engaged us to help with their strategy. They are going to seek funding from World Bank and other places well in excess of hundreds of millions of dollars. And we've already engaged with that city in terms of bringing not just sharing cities solutions, but broader European solutions to the Latin American market. They're interested as a city in terms of Medellin, and they're interested as an investment community in terms of IFC and the World Bank of the solutions that come from Europe, because they're highly relevant, they're social, they're sustainable, and they're that. And I see that a really important avenue, process avenue, to the scale-up ambitions that we've got. And then it comes down to some very practical examples like the one that Sarah mentioned in terms of the lamppost and what you can do with it, and others. So yes, I would reiterate your point that the 500 million feels like it's something we should be going for with confidence, not just as sharing cities, also working with other SCCO1s in the marketplace.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that, Graham. So I think, the next question I would have to all of the panelists is sort of links back to what we were talking about a minute ago, that outcomes-driven approach. What are the needs of the city? What are the challenges that our cities are actually trying to address where technology can play a part? So I'm going to go to you, Hannah, first. If you can tell us, what do you, from your experience of working with lots of different cities as well, what are some of the challenges the cities are trying to address, particularly post-pandemic, where smart technologies can actually play a role and where there is a decent business case?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think I was going to say kind of, wider kind of economic growth, and I think there's two strands to that, isn't there? There's the immediate phase of post-pandemic recovery, and then the longer term economic resilience, I think, going forward. I think here in London, the Mayor of London launched his London Recovery Board in response to the pandemic last September, and that came up with 9 key missions. And they're around kind of revitalising the high streets, green infrastructure and sustainability, and digital for all. I think they're the ones that leapt out at me, and you can already see how kind of smart technology might start to underpin that. On the high street, you can gather better data around how people are using spaces and use that to kind of reprogram and bring some life back into them. And then I think Green Deal, some of the things yourself and Graham have spoken about, you can already see how smart infrastructure will allow us to recover in a much more sustainable way. But I think from my perspective, in terms of long-term economic resilience, I think the pandemic has hugely accelerated just the use of any digital technologies, and I don't think it's going to revert or slow down anytime soon. I think for me, you start to get into, okay, well, if the economy in the future is going to be digital, how do you make sure every business, every community has good digital connectivity and the right digital skills to be able to participate in that future economy? Especially with some of the predictions by the likes of the WEF, I think they said 44% of jobs will be automated for the next 5 years. That's a huge economic pressure coming. And I think once you've got those foundations in place, the good connectivity, the good skills, well, then you can start building all kinds of smart infrastructure, smart services on top of that, without worrying about things like digital exclusion or kind of bad connectivity not allowing them to function properly. In summary, I'm very worried about the economic resilience of places, and I think that digital and smart technology around can hugely contribute to making a more streamlined transition.
Thank you, Hannah. And I definitely recognise what you said about how the pandemic has accelerated an acceptance of using technology in order to solve problems, particularly in local authorities. You can't get away with saying that people won't use this kind of technology anymore, because we've just seen 2 years nearly now of people using technology they didn't beforehand. Graham, I'm going to come over to you. Similar question, what do you think some of the challenges are that cities are facing, the benefits from this kind of technology, and in particular where there's a good investment case?
So the thought of never wasting a good crisis comes to mind. I'll give you 3 quick examples. I think COVID has really caused cities to reflect how poorly they currently manage data, and therefore the opportunity to do that better. And the work on urban data platforms at a European level, I think, provides an avenue into that. So that'd be the first example. The second example is a challenge, which is around how do you transition from the old dirty way of moving people and goods around a city to clean, green, healthy, inclusive, and affordable mobility. Those latter 2 words of inclusive and affordable, I think, are key. And I think there is both complementarity between the pandemic issue of people don't want to be crammed into public transport, and also the long-term sustainability aspect of moving towards electric micromobility solutions. So that's one example where we're working on something called mobility islands. They're places which enable anybody to be 5 minutes away from the starting point maximum of getting around the city to where it is with choice in terms of how they travel around. So that's a challenge which is both pandemic and sustainability related, where we're currently working on a solution. Again, I think that's something that we must do in collaboration as SCCO1s and the marketplace. And the final one is the lamppost. You know, that humble little lamppost that's out there. There's a paper that, a white paper that got produced a month or so ago that talks about the role of the lamppost in responding and recovering from the pandemic. You can put all sorts of different digital monitors and sensors that support also connectivity onto that citywide array of assets. And these are latent opportunities for us, for which some cities have captured and all cities need to. And you need money to do that. And you need to build a business case that people have confidence in, that investors will invest in. And I think, excuse me, I think that's our opportunity from this point on.
Thank you, Graham. And certainly there's a piece of work that we've been doing in the GLA recently, basically around data on high streets, where we've been talking to people such as Vodafone and MasterCard and working out how we can triangulate data sets and help to revive the high streets. Particularly, they were already in a bad way, and then pandemic came along and they're in an even worse way, which I think reflects very well what you were saying. And it seems to me now that the demand for that kind of data and the demand for that kind of technology is growing, and the various sensors that go with it. There's some very interesting things starting to crop up in London. And what I think is interesting as well, when we had our investors summit a while back, Graham, what some of the investors were telling us then is that they were interested in the pipeline of opportunities that comes off the back of investing in the kinds of technologies you were talking about. Okay, over to you, Sarah. Same question. What are some of the challenges that cities are trying to address, and in your experience, Greenwich in particular?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think all 3 of you now have talked about the fact that the pandemic and the post-pandemic world has thrown up new challenges or potentially highlighted existing challenges, and some of those, you know, Graham mentioned about mobility and how we move around the city in a post-pandemic world, the reliance on digital infrastructure and the future that is going to be so much more digitally enabled, and how we get there. I think the theme through all of that for me is resilience, and my interpretation or my challenge that I would pull through is resilience around climate change. So, you know, the pandemic has shown us or has challenged resilience in some ways. I think that is almost mirrored by the challenge of climate change, and that is going to increasingly challenge our resilience in cities. And there are clear opportunities how smart technologies can help us tackle climate change. And the SCCO1 programs, that sisterhood now of programs, have all got brilliant examples of how we've used smart technology to implement a new sort of lower emission mode of transport, mode of heating, housing. And going forward, I think there's a great place now for us to start really showing more and more how smart technology can help tackle climate change and crucially build resilience against climate change.
And in Greenwich, so one of the things I think, as we've been looking at the Green New Deal work that Hannah mentioned earlier as part of the recovery plan, we're looking at how do you decarbonise the grid and how do you, decarbonise our buildings. But the big one has been behaviour change, because once you've done all of that, you need to then incentivise behaviour change. And that's a difficult one to create a business model for, because there's not often a return on investment. Is this an area that Digital Greenwich have looked into, or you've done any work?
Yeah, so it's actually a really interesting measure that we looked at in sharing cities called Greenwich Energy Hero. And it absolutely tried to sort of centre on that point of, okay, you can implement technology straight onto a system or an energy system to help you control that system better. But what about the other side of energy use and energy demand, which is about behaviour and about how people interact and use energy? And to tackle and move us all forward towards decarbonising homes, decarbonising heat and power demand, it needs to be both system level and behaviour and citizen involved. So Greenwich Energy Hero looked at how you could get residents involved in responding to peak energy alerts on our power system. So could you give them the technology to sort of monitor their energy use, but also have a way to alert them as to when that peak demand on our national energy system is high, and where they could be involved in the response to that and gain reward for that. I think you're right, behaviour change around and energy is going to be a key thing, and how we use technology, how we bring people along in that use of technology to tackle climate change and energy is going to be really interesting.
Just to add to that, we recently worked on a project in London's largest industrial estate, and we did some user engagement, and the energy grid came up as a major problem there. And we interviewed a whole range of quite large companies, one of which said because the energy grid was so overloaded, they were spending £70,000 a month on diesel generators. And we did a similar thing, just show them the data and say, if you shifted your production line back to run 3 hours later, you'd got a quarter the amount of kind of diesel, which has huge environmental benefits, but also has slightly reduced the load on that grid while they work up the proper solutions. I think it works for both systems, but business communities as well.
And I think that speaks to the challenge around business models and business cases for smart technology, is it's often based on a saving rather than revenue or direct cash. Which brings us nicely to our next question about so we've identified some of the challenges that we face in our cities that could benefit from smart solutions, or have, that we've tested already in sharing cities. But how do we convert these challenges into investable business models, into business models that direct investors are interested in, private sector invested in, local authorities, municipalities are invested in? I think I'll come to you first on this one, Graham. How do we convert these challenges into investable business models, and what do we even mean by an investable business model?
I'd like to pick up on Sarah's point. A lot of the smart solutions do require behaviour change. Behaviour change is something an investor typically doesn't get very excited about, because it just smells of risk. And I think the example of the Hero in Greenwich, similar in digital social markets, as we've called them, incentivization mechanisms in Milan and Lisbon, in the sharing cities, lead cities, actually helps to demonstrate structurally how we're approaching behavior change. It's absolutely key. So to the question, what the heck is a business model? Well, if you view it as bring three important things together that typically are never together in a city. Number one is, what problem or what opportunity are you fixing for the user? And if you start with that, then you can actually understand what value is. That value may be financial, may non-financial, quite likely it is going to be public value, it's going to be complicated. So the number one thing is how can we capture value? The second thing is what are the technical options that will require investment that actually service that value? And then the third point is rather than go to the coffers and get money, which is in short supply these days, how do we actually structure the financing to make this whole thing work? Now, those three things, the first will be owned by a community manager who goes out and speaks to people, who typically doesn't speak to the technologists, the engineers that engineer things, and sure as heck won't speak to the finance people that actually pull things together. So by bringing those three things together, then I think have the basic bare bones of what can build a business model that will work to solve a problem. The key thing then is to figure out how can you tailor that for a specific city, because every city is different in the same way that all four of us are different as well. We have common DNA. So that fourth piece in terms of actually structurally looking at a community or a city in terms of the recipient of a solution is key. So a business model needs to be tailored to the city and needs to bring those three things together. An example, EV charging points. Sarah mentioned it. So there are options in terms of what they look like. There are options in terms of who would invest in them, a developer, the city hall, a utility company. And there are options in terms of who might pay for them. Well, they might actually put some public budget forward to stimulate and incentivize people to shift towards electric vehicles. And then the individuals may pay, businesses may pay. So there's a variety of different options there in terms of the need you're solving, the technical options that you can put forward, and the way that you structure the business model to make that work. And I think what's exciting about SMART, and again, Sarah raised it again, let's engage the community and ask them. Sometimes they know Donald Rumsfeld, sometimes they don't know. We need to understand for different solutions how best to engage the public. But if we don't engage the public, we'll get it wrong. And if we do engage the public, there's opportunities for them part of the solution and actually contribute some of the resources, or even indeed through crowdfunding some of their funds too. So in terms of the types of investors, to get interest, for the big scale investors, you need to get scale. So the pension funds and such like, it's important to actually aggregate demand to achieve scale. And then you need to have confidence, and confidence comes from being able to articulate clearly the design makes sense, it's standard, it's common, and also here is the mechanism by which we'll be able to evidence and measure value through metrics. That will get interest of the investment community and confidence of the investment community. There's lots of cash out there. It's just not in the public purse right. So we need to shift thinking from blending some stimulus public funds with scale funds that do exist there. Not easy, entirely possible. And I think this community of 120 plus cities is a wonderful opportunity to do that for Europe and demonstrate to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Graham. And from what you talked about there, there's a real role here as well for the public sector and others to think about their role as anchor institutions and anchor investors, both not only in terms of cash, but in terms of the assets that they have, and also London's very large pension funds, which we don't necessarily involve in these conversations as much as what we should do. I might come back to standards in a minute, Graham, as well. I think that's an area that's probably worth picking on in a bit more detail. But Sarah, taking things from the point of view of a local authority, from a municipality, I think what Graham has mentioned there makes complete sense. But what are some of the challenges with business models? Because it's not just about return on investment with a local authority, is it? It can be about other things, political things. What are some of the challenges, and how do we convert these opportunities into investable business models?
Yeah, so firstly, I think I'll pick up on what Graham mentioned, which is about confidence. And Graham was mentioning it in terms of confidence from the investor community, confidence in being able to articulate the challenge and that you've got a solution for that challenge at scale. I think that applies to the places, the organisations, the municipalities that represent those places that are seeking to address the challenge. They've got to have confidence and they've got to have the experience embedded within them to be able to start having the capacity, the capability to look at smart technologies as a solution, be able to speak that language, be able to understand and be able to articulate what they want from a solution, and have the confidence in that so that the market can see there is confidence in the local authority. The local authority knows what it wants, the municipality is ready to scale, ready to articulate what it wants. And I think that's been a particular benefit and bonus of programs like this, because of what SCCO1 programs and what Sharing Cities has done is given each municipality involved the opportunity, the time, the resource to start building its own experience and expertise of smart technology and how it delivers it. And it's only with that confidence that you're going to see more and more local authorities start to pick that up or be comfortable to go to scale and be comfortable to do things at a bigger scale. So I think Graham's right, it's confidence is the word there. And I think to your other point about business model there, I think you're absolutely right. For a municipality, it's a different language to what a business model is. We do, we create business cases. That's part of our governance procedure. When we bring forward new projects, we build a business case around it. But that business case and that business model is sometimes very different and very differently talked about to the sort of economic community and the finance community. So I think it's kind of trying to bridge the gap and recognising, not be scared of the fact there is going to be non-traditional business models, as Graham mentioned, maybe mixed sorts of finances, and getting better at articulating and recognising the value in different kinds of return, whether that be social return, environmental return, I think confidence and recognising that there's not going to be non-traditional business models and be able to be okay with that.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because, we're not just talking about confidence in, making sure that people are putting the cash in the confident. We're talking about confidence people to be able to engage in this sector and understand this sector.
Yeah.
A lot of the officers that you were sort of referring to there in local authorities won't have done anything with this kind of digital technology before or these kind of business models. So that's obviously going to take a little bit of time. And then on the other side of it, Hannah, there's the investment community as well. So same question to you about how do we convert opportunities to investment business models? And can you give us a bit of an appraisal about what kind of investors we're actually talking about as well? I know we've worked together a bit on digital districts in looking at which investors there are in London who might be interested.
Yeah. So I'll start with the business model side of things. So I think for me, when I get moving with these projects, my task is normally to work out how do you deliver kind of the appropriate or acceptable levels of returns, whatever they may be, financial, economic, social, environmental, to the right stakeholders in the right time scales. It's normally sometimes that last piece that's the most challenging, that you can build a business case that gives the right numbers, but can you get them in the right time scales for the investors? And I think if you unpack that, you can start with, okay, what stakeholders do you need around the table? I think because these smart technology business cases are rarely linear and purely financial, then you need to bring in those that are going to place value on the social and environmental to get the kind of business model to stack up. And also in these large cities, kind of asset ownership, service delivery, model ownership is rarely simple. So if you're going to get scale, you're going to have to get a lot of stakeholders aligned. And then you move into, I think, the benefit side of things and really working out what benefits are generated, but also who do they accrue to. I think that's the other issue we have. Sometimes we look at benefits in the whole, but actually they're accruing to very different people. And I think you also need to look at the flip side of that in the risk side of things as well. I think almost as valuable as benefits are, sometimes the risks accrue to the people the benefits aren't accruing to. How do you align those? And then I think the last thing is in the right timescales. And we found that sometimes you need to layer some of these interventions together. So actually getting one thing funded is quite difficult. But if you maybe underpin some of these investments with a quite stable business case, for example, Sunderland at the moment have gone to market for a smart city platform, but they've underpinned it with a fibre investment. Very stable. We'll get, you know, traditional investors like pension fund backed kind of telco companies in the door, but then it transfers the risk off, so you can start to layer on. They're doing some smart asset management of housing estates layered on, and you can start to kind of build it that way. But I think your point on confidence was really interesting, and I guess that's where my involvement in sharing cities has come in the legacy of the programme. How to does London in particular keep that going? And working with Nathan, come up with the Digital Districts programme, which basically aims to provide some of that capability to London boroughs, really support them in identifying potential projects and developing them to a point of maturity whereby they are ready to go and engage with both the kind of institutional investors, but also public sector funds, maybe even some venture funds. And yeah, really empower boroughs to feel confident in bringing those things forward, but also setting up that communication channel with the investor community so they can say, look, this is what we're interested in. Could you add this into the scope of it? And it would be far more attractive. And also to add some pace into it, because I think as Graham said, there's a huge amount of money out there, and some of the investors we work with just struggle with the pace of things coming forward, especially in response to the climate emergency. This infrastructure needs to be in the next kind of 5 years, not rolling forward beyond that.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Hannah. And I think there's a couple of things that I'm going to come to you on, Graham. There was one thing that Hannah just mentioned there, which she didn't use these words, but these are the words that we use, the bundling of technology, and how the bundling together can actually make the business model more attractive. And also I'd like to pick up on Stan as well. So I know that you've done through Sharing Cities and other work some thinking about how the bundling of technology can actually build a more effective business model. Have you got any thoughts that you could share on that, or any experiences where you've seen it work?
Sure, and thanks, Nathan. And I'd like to join together two bits that both Sarah and Hannah mentioned, because I think that's important. So Mary was labeling capacity and confidence. Hannah mentioned this aspect of benefits deployed in different ways and received, and also received in different ways. And then I'd like to pick up on the standards bit. I'll come to bundling. Imagine we could very pragmatically take a specific measure and identify a clear benefits logic, a little diagram that is very pragmatic, which people can pick up and use as a starting point. That builds confidence, that builds capacity, that actually clarifies precisely who and where the benefits and costs will come in. My take is, if we produce those sorts of starting points for all of the common solutions around cities, we'll scale up faster. If those documents, and blessed by a standards organization as a guide, as opposed to the traditional way we look at standards, then we have a common solution which gets everybody to first base very quickly. And I think that's the opportunity. If they're using the same tools, the investors are going to go, I like that. They'll be far more interested to actually deploy money against it. So I think that's something that joins together pragmatic tools to build confidence, to get money and standardize them. To the point about bundling, demand aggregation, if we could pool groups of solutions together, and there's a logical association. So Hannah mentioned an example. I would take the lamppost as one, electric vehicle charging point and a lamppost. The case for an electric vehicle charging in terms of investment is different to the lamppost. The lamppost is clear. You get 60 to 80% return on investment savings, energy savings from deploying that. You can do it at scale. Lots of people, it's proven, investors are interested. Toss into a portfolio, a large portfolio of lamp upgrades, a few sensors where the business case is less clear, where there's public value, social value coming from it, and the investor is going to go, well, heck, you know, I'll take the 2%, which worries me, and I'll take the 98%, which is good at scale. We'll get a cheaper price. And by the way, that will pay for all the smart stuff that's attached to it. So understanding what are logical combinations of bundles make a great deal of sense. If we can put tools that are packaged and consistent together for those common solutions, we'll attract money. And that presents the opportunity to make speed and benefits for European citizens. So I think that's a huge opportunity for us. And organizations that are about standards are boring and trusted. Let's focus on the trusted bit. By the way, I have a question for you, Nathan. You know the 2 meters apart business, as I look at the screen there in that big conference, are those power things on the floor just 2 meters apart by coincidence? Or not?
Complete coincidence.
I thought they're initially putting dots on the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Gregor. And one very, very quick question or reflection on standards, get your thoughts on it quickly. I think one of the challenges is when you're applying standards to something that is enshrined in national legislation, they work quite well. But this is a fast-moving world that we're talking about, where sensors are changing rapidly, technologies changing rapidly. And I guess one of the criticisms I've heard from cities about using standards is as soon as they're created, they're out of date. But I think certainly in conversations I've had with you in the past, it's less about that and it's more about creating that management framework and that kind of ecosystem in which you deploy this kind of technology. So in terms of using standards to give confidence to the marketplace, what do you think they need to be doing in the smart city context over the next year or two?
Good question, Nathan, and thank you for asking it. Standards, not only are they boring, they're also slow if you take the negative view on things. So the standards organizations, certainly BSI and also the European and international ones, are seeking to produce rapid standards. So that addresses the speed thing. The other thing which I think is absolutely vital is to actually write to the audience. So absolutely, if you can write to a politician and give the politician the gift of knowledge, the key issues they should deal with, and a few next steps in a short document, that'd be really cool. And that would engage at the top of the office. And that's typically what standardization organizations do not do and should do. So write to the politician in political language in short documents. Those can be produced quickly and will be impactfully, and cascade down from that to deal with the multifunctional aspects of what's needed to actually engage all of the heads of. And that's the second layer, which is how do I go about putting this together? And then the traditional deep dive is necessary. And that does take time. And that is something that sometimes is cast into certification regulation and such like. But those top 2 layers are missing and are dreadfully important. And that's what I've been bashing the table about to seek to get standardization organizations working on. Because at the moment, cities don't use standards.
Completely agree. Thank you for that, Graham. It's nice to see people working in your organisation are getting younger and younger every time.
Yeah, this one's very expensive too.
Thank you, Graham. Right, we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go to some questions. We've got a couple of questions, probably enough for one each in terms of time. I'm going to come to you first, Hannah. We have a question from Charlotte Katerina. Who do you see in the driver's seat to develop the business models at scale? So who is it that should actually be responsible for developing these business models? And what role does the private sector play other than just putting the money up?
Interesting question, because I'm missing people with the answer, but I think that's on the fence. But I think it has to be collaborative. I think that's what we've come to the conclusion of in digital districts as well. In that we're going to convene a forum of London boroughs, development corporations, and the investors to have these conversations. Because I think if you let just one side do it, if you let an authority do it, they'll produce a business case that delivers maybe the economic, social, environmental, but maybe won't be able to access some of the finance they need. If you let the investors do it, they'll prioritise potentially financial returns, maybe in these days and ages, environmental, but the social might get forgotten. So I really do think, sitting on the fence a bit, but I think you need both parties together and potentially a mediator in the middle that can take fair and objective decisions and present some options back to both parties that say, these are the trade-offs you need to make. These options seem to give the best for this, and yeah, I don't think one party, I think maybe that's what's happened previously. I don't think one party can do it. I think forums that bring them together in, you know, quite concise and defined ways could be really useful going forward.
Yeah, I agree, and certainly one of the experiences we've had from, or one of the results that have come out of the Sharing Cities programme is the value of having public, private and academic partnerships in place, right from the very design point through to the technical implementation, through to the implementation. It inevitably comes down to the city to do a lot of the work and to do a lot of the implementation. But having those partners involved, I don't know if that's what you found in Greenwich.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not the usual people landscape that a local authority operates in, is to be in the mix with, you know, private sector, SMEs, academia, but it is what makes these research programmes and the exploration of new technologies go better, I think. Yeah.
And then I've got another question for you, Sarah. Changing tack a little bit, we've got a question here about from Angelo, talking about, can we export the model that we've developed in Sharing Cities, and the model we've developed in London to mid-sized cities? And I think this is probably born out of a slight misunderstanding of London, because we are a collection of mid-sized cities. Yeah. So I think this is an interesting one for you. Is the work that we've done in Sharing Cities and the stuff that we talked about today, how could we make that more relevant to mid-sized cities?
Yeah, so I think, well, I think you're right, London is almost a melting pot of multiple cities. So Greenwich as a borough is probably the size of a small city. So from that perspective, absolutely yes. But I think what you've got across the whole SEC01 community is a collection of examples, a range of cities that you should be able to find something in that is sort of reminiscent of your city, and therefore pick up examples that might work. But I think also it comes down to, yes, there is different scales of cities, and what works in one may not always work in the other. But what we've done in Sharing Cities is to test technologies, is to test the way those are delivered. And that should have relevance, hopefully in use, if we share it right, to any city wanting to pick up a similar technology or a similar method of delivery.
I'll just add to that, I think sometimes mid-sized cities have the benefits in that maybe their governance structure, their asset ownership structures are simpler. I think from our investor point of view, you know, our investors, that smart city opportunity I mentioned, Sunderland, they jumped on it because it's a nice, it's big enough, but not too big and complex. They've got a couple of key assets in a stadium, a hospital, enough to build a good business case, but nothing too complex that it's going to take kind of too long. So I think there are certain benefits of mid-sized cities as well.
Exactly, and I often think that, you know, people think that London automatically comes with the benefits of having massive scale. But anybody who's worked in the incredibly fragmented government and governance that London is, not just the 33 boroughs, but 12 pan-London agencies and NHS trusts, etc. Actually, sometimes it would be easier, I think, if you were a mid-sized city. And kind of tying that together and a few of the other conversations we've had, over to you, Graham, for the last question from the audience. Somebody has said, referring to that sort of needs-driven approach to designing solutions, outcomes-driven approach to designing solutions, and also bringing in the community and bringing in the citizen in the design of solutions. They're challenging us in that if every city does it in this way and does something slightly differently, how do we make sure that we develop solutions that can actually scale and aren't just very much tailored to that specific circumstance? So I think this strikes right at the heart of Sharing Cities' mantra of a common approach to shared challenges.
Absolutely, and one hears the one size doesn't fit all statement all over the place, and that's true. But if you and I walk into a Marks and Spencer store and want to buy a suit, we're pretty sure they'll have one. We don't have to have a bespoke, tailored solution all the time. So the message that it will depend is true, and it will depend on the solution. However, the approach that we've taken in Sharing Cities, and I believe is being supported by both the Smart Cities Marketplace, other SCCO ones, is that aspect of packaging, Lego. If we focus not on the physical reality, which needs to drive SME innovation, different solutions in terms of the actual physical thing that's there, but if we focus on functional consistency in terms of what it is that you want, the principles that underpin it, the basic design parameters and such like, then you can move towards something which is a far more affordable and common solution. So commonality at a functional level is, I believe, essential, particularly when you're starting to look at digitization. A call this morning about urban data platforms. Without standard, you have anarchy. You have a complete mess. With them as appropriate, you can manage to actually get digital adoption within cities, particularly the smaller ones, which don't attract the market, don't get capacity, and desperately need support. And by the way, that's where most youth live. So it's entirely feasible for us to do that. And I think what we've done is we've put something on the table as Sharing Cities in terms of an approach to packaging, which is very fragile. And I think the opportunity of Europe is to take it, adopt it, improve it, prove it, and it will benefit Europe and the rest of the world. But I think it's fragile at the moment, and it needs us to get together around it to make sure that we prove that it works for the benefit of all, swiftly.
Thank you very much, Graham. Right, we are drawing towards an end, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists for some final words and final thoughts. If you could keep it as brief as you can. Where do we move on from here? How do we shift forward the conversation around investment and business models that will benefit the city, the citizen, and the private sector as well? We'll start with you, Sarah, and then we'll come to you now.
Yeah, sure. So I think this, well, reflected in this forum really, with Smart Scale's invitation for us to come and with the sort of ecosystem of projects we've built up. My reflection is that funding like this, the Smart Cities and Communities stream, Horizon stream, is key to kickstarting. To move forward from there, I think it goes back to what sort of Jens, I think Gail mentioned about not exploiting, but using what we've learned. So kickstart with funding, use what we've learned, share what we've learned, and start to build confidence within the municipalities, the authorities, to articulate what we want, and in turn building confidence in the market to present those solutions and move to the scale.
Thank you, Sarah. Anna?
I think for me it's, yeah, wherever possible, support local authorities get that confidence capacity, and then provide kind of regular and open forums for local authorities to bring their pipelines to an investor community and get them to work together on ones that interest them, to bring them to fruition together with.
That would be very useful. Thank you very much. And Graham, final word to you.
So there's a missing cog in the system. We've got European funds. Jens was talking about it. We've got cities of various different sizes doing things. The missing cog in the system is nationally convened smart cities programs. And I believe that that needs to be something which we do in addition to the others, because they can convene and bring a lot of the things together. There are a few countries that are doing that well across Europe and other parts of the world, but we need to have more of that added to all the rest. That's a missing cog in the system as far as I'm concerned.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Graham. And that brings us to an end at exactly the right timing. So I'd like to thank my panelists who have been here in the flesh, Sarah from Greenwich, Anna from Jacobs, and Graham all the way up from sunny Scotland. This brings to an end our session. I think we've ended there with a call to arms for the SCCO1 community, that this is something that we all need to invest time in, and to think about how we best exploit all the great work that we've done as individual projects and as a community as well. So I'm going to hand back to you now, Philippe, from London back to Lyon.
Thank you very much, Nathan, and thanks, London. So that was great. Thank you very much. Maybe there's one thing to add, because we have heard with several SCC1 projects that they are willing to create or to design some innovation or investment fund at the local level. So that's maybe something to dig in